Here's 400 years now and over. All them superpower trying to conquer Africa. Yes, they went up there with all the lust and the greed. But look at how much they try, they can't succeed. Yes, they kill and keep killing. But the more Africans they kill, the more they see coming. And they try and they can't make hands with Africans. Just back up the bag and it's back they gone to the land. Why? Evil warriors they gone down. It's evil warriors we come. Evil Africans that they kill. It's before they see come. Chuchu! Zulu! Ashanti! Watusi! Chuchu! Zulu! The more warriors that they got down. We get back Mozambique so easy. Zimbabwe and Angola are ready. And if it's one thing I saw now and never. Namibia and South Africa around the corner. Yes, it's one bounded from on Hiroshima. And they get the whole of Japan to surrender. And the 200 years red cloud and the reservation. But for 400 years they still can't love you African. Why? The warriors they got up. It's the warriors we come. The Africans that they kill. It's the more they see coming. Tutu! Zulu! Ashanti! Watusi! Tutu! Zulu! The more African that they got down. They deal with Lamumba long ago. Just they deal with Moboyak and Sipiko. Just they keep killing leaders after leader. But look at how much they kill Africans won't surrender. And how come the same people want to tell me Africans today got no unity? Yes, I know they may say I'm drunk, they may say I'm mad. But one day Africans gonna be living under. The more warriors they gone down. It's the more warriors we come. The more Africans that they kill. It's the more Tutu! Zulu! Ashanti! Watusi! Balai! Balai! The more Africans that they gone down. Yes, them have the gun and them have the bomb. Yes, it's them making all the nuclear weapons. And if there's one thing I know now I could bet, Africans never invent no bombers yet. But then how come with all the bad? When they reach Africa, the weapon become a scrapyard. Like they won't believe the words of the old witch doctor. When he said that Africa shall never be. The more Africans they got down. It's the more Africans we come. The more warriors that they kill. It's the more they sick. Tutu! Zulu, Ashanti, what to see? Same people want to tell me Africans today got no unity. Yes, I know they may say I'm drunk, they may say I'm mad. But one day Africans gonna be living under. The more warriors they gone down. It's the more warriors we come. The more Africans that they kill. It's the more Zuzu, Zulu, Ashanti, Watusi, Balai, Balai. The more Africans that they gone down. Yes, them have the gun and them have the bomb. Yes, it's them making all the nuclear weapons. And if there's one thing I know now I could bet, Africans never invent no bombers yet. But then how come with all the bad? When they reach Africa, the weapon become a scrapyard. Like they won't believe the words of the old witch doctor. When he said that Africa shall never be, the more Africans they gone down, it's the more Africans we come, the more warriors that they kill, it's the more they sing. Zuzu, Zulu, Ashanti, Watusi, Zuzu, Zulu, Ashanti, Watusi, Makandele, Zuzu, Zulu, the more African that they got done. Ashanti, Watusi, Zuzu, Zulu, Ashanti, Watusi, Makandele, Zuzu, Zulu, the more African that they got done.
The black man himself, Black Stallion, Dr. Leroy Calise, more come, the more African that they gone down, the more African come. Africa shall never be conquered. Africans shall never be conquered. We are, of course, living in serious times in our Guyana where, as Martin Carter said in 1953, the heroes are hunted and shot like a dog. Here they watch us and lick their tongues like beasts who crouch to prey upon some little child. The state, the government, they are arresting left, right, and center. Nurses speaking in private. Artists singing bad lyrics, arrested. Young men looting on the night of protests are charged with terrorism. Little children, 11-year-old girls, are being abducted, and the state is covering up. Martin Carter, I quote again, in Malaysia, the hero is hunted and shot like a dog. Here, meaning Guyana, they watch us and lick their tongues like beasts who crouch to prey upon some little child. And we know what it is to prey on little children. Martin Carter was long before his time. He's writing this in the early 1950s. But I tell you, he continues. Like a tide from the heart of things, inexorably and inevitably a day will come. If I do not live to see that day, my son will see it. If he does not see it, his son will see it. And it will come circling this world like fire. It will come to this land and to every land. And when it comes, I shall come alive again and laugh again and walk out of this prison. That time is coming to Guyana because Guyanese will not be conquered. Guyanese will not be conquered. No jails, no wanted bulletins, no terrorism charge. Bob Marley say, no bullet can stop us now because, as CLR James, another Caribbean patriot, would say, we have a date with destiny. Good evening to all of you, wherever you're joining us from tonight, this evening, in the morning in England, this past midnight. Good evening to all of you. It's Thursday, and Vincent Alexander is here to talk to us. We continue to speak truth, to corrupt power. We continue to speak truth to our children. We continue to speak truth to our gods, because the truth ultimately will set us free. When evil stalks the land, then the bullhorn of justice must sound far and wide. And that's what we're doing. And that's what they fear. I think it was Bertolt Brecht who asked, why do they fear the open word? Why do they fear the open word? They have good reason to fear the open word. Mohammed has been charged today with underpaying taxes for a vehicle. I think they said back in 2020. Well, we know 2020, the president was driving Mohammed's bulletproof vehicle. Is the president complicit in the Mohammed's underpaying taxes for the vehicle? In a normal country, that would be a question that reporters would be jumping over each other to ask the president. And in some countries, the president would already resign. Anyhow, this is Guyana. Welcome to all of you. Welcome, good evening. I see that you all are gathering, and I think we're ready for Vincent. Let's bring him in. Vincent, good evening.
Good evening, David, to yourself and all of the viewers and listeners.
And of course, we are living in serious times, busy times, but you may ask me whenever we were not busy and serious. All right, Vincent, I know G come at a meeting today, and with everything that has been happening with the Adriana Young issue, we tend to take our eyes a little bit off GCOM. So I want you tonight to bring our eyes back to focus on that body, because that is the body that is responsible for elections And thanks to you, we have been keeping an eagle eye on what's happening there. Um, Tell us where things are. What's on the agenda? Um, what were the big issues that engaged the attention of GCOM this week?
David, let me preface my comments on GCOM by something I have said ad nauseum. It's quite unrelated to 2020 or any other such event. And that is, we have an electoral system which will not deliver to us the kind of government and governance required for the plurality that we have to confront in terms of the Guyanese society. So yes, GCOM is preparing for elections, but I emphasize and re-emphasize that elections as presently constituted do not represent the kind of process that delivers to Guyana a government and subsequently the kind of governance that's required in our circumstance. GCOM continues to prepare for elections. But in doing so, I continue to make the point that GCOM is not doing all that's required, even in the context of our electoral scenario, to conduct a free, a fair election and to ensure that every electorate has the opportunity to have his or her vote cast and valued equally. So there are a number of things that, in my humble opinion, should be done, which GCOM has either decided not to do or which GCOM is dragging its feet on in a manner that will not see us doing it in time for elections. So we know that GCOM has made a decision, logically, that they will not embrace the capture of fingerprints digitally for registration purposes, and they will not embrace the use of fingerprints for identification purposes at the place of poll. And those are two critical things, in my humble opinion, because what those two things seek to do is to make the whole voting process an effective process. An effective process, because if we were to capture fingerprints digitally, it will reduce the problem which we have, and this is not a disputed issue, that we are not in a position to cross-match absolutely all of our fingerprints, because manual fingerprints very often are not fit for purpose, and therefore we can't cross-match. And if we can't cross-match all of our fingerprints, then that can allow for duplicate multiple registration, as has occurred in the past. Also, if we do not use fingerprints for the purpose of identification at the place of poll, it will allow for the kind of situation that occurred in 2020 and probably before, where persons who are not present because they're overseas and or deceased are voted for. And whilst there are those who would like to contend that this is not a serious matter, the fact of the matter is that evidence has been produced to show that there was multiple voting at the last elections, and GCOM has not engaged the matter in a manner to correct any gaps in the system, and I dare say that there has been a cover-up in this matter, most manifested in the way in which the Attorney General corralled all of the evidence, contended when corralling the evidence that he will prove that the evidence in fact was fraudulent. And over 2 years, that evidence has been corralled and no attempt has been made to use it to prove otherwise. And so, notwithstanding the contention that we have all the perfect systems, we have evidence that those systems have not worked. The mere state of our ID cards, some of which date back to 2008, do not make it possible for our system to work perfectly. And there are those who are seeking to ensure that there are no changes to the system from that perspective. Now, against the background of biometrics not being utilized, I have made a proposal that we still have to deal with the question of the thousands of Guyanese who died overseas and whose names are still on the list. This matter is on the agenda. It's being dragged out. No decision has been made. And clearly the attempt is to ensure that those names remain on the list. And that's one reason why I would say that we are not in a situation to deliver a free and fair election, because flaws in our system, which have previously been utilized, are being allowed to remain in the system with the potential of them being utilized again. Secondly, I have raised a matter that we've probably not discussed previously, meaning prior elections, is the human rights entitlement of incarcerated persons, and more specifically, remanded persons to be able to vote. This is a matter that has global attention because it has been raised in other jurisdictions, the question of incarcerated persons having the right to vote. Again, this matter is being pushed back on all sorts of contentions. For example, the contention of the chairperson is that there is the Prisons Act forbids that anybody should have contact with prisoners, and therefore, in the face of that, we cannot deal with the prisoners unless there is legislative change. I don't agree with that contention, because if one reads the Act carefully, one will see the Act specifies that you cannot deal with prisoners for unlawful purposes. For unlawful purposes, the Act specifies that. And getting a prisoner registered and or cast a vote certainly cannot be an unlawful purpose, particularly in the face of our Constitution, which specifies that one has the right to vote once one is registered and one is a citizen of Guyana. And of course, there's the issue of the Commonwealth citizen as well. And therefore, in that regard, I would contend that prisoners have the right to vote. And the extent to which the law specifies that people who commit election offenses are suspended from voting for a 5-year period, and people who are insane cannot vote, is the extent to which all others, I will argue, have the right to vote. And if GCOM is to fulfill its mandate, it has to find a mechanism to provide for the incarcerated to vote. But we are dragging our feet on that, and again, trying to move in a direction where this will not be realized. So the point I'm making is that a number of things which can be done and which should be done, even in the circumstance of an election that is dysfunctional in terms of democracy, even in that circumstance, these things are not being done. Similarly, we have not yet resolved the question of the Commonwealth citizens. We have a law, which is a recent law, that speaks to somebody who's a Commonwealth citizen having the right to vote if he or she has been resident for 1 year and if there is evidence that the person intends to be domiciled. Now, in the past, we have simply taken the 1 year and registered Commonwealth citizens. The question of domicility has now arisen. Again, we have not finalized that matter. Again, we are dragging our feet in that matter. And in the instance where the AG was written to advise on this matter, the advice has completely ignored the question of domicility and simply suggested we should proceed as we have done in the past. So again, here's another issue that has not been resolved, that is quite clearly requires a resolution by us determining what do we mean by being domiciled. Will someone who simply lived here for 1 year as a Commonwealth citizen and probably has a 1 year job permit, does that mean that person is domiciled? And that question is not being answered. In the face of a non-answer, we're saying let's continue to have such persons once they've been here for 1 year to cast their vote. You know, and it's so ironical that we have to rely on an attorney general, or not have to, but are made to rely on an attorney general who is clearly uh, partisan, and therefore is not likely to render advice that is impartial and objective. And therefore, really, we're in a conundrum in being told that we have to rely on the Attorney General, particularly in the circumstance where we do not have a legal officer, and in the circumstance where a legal officer is out of the job, largely because of the same Attorney General who has a difference, who shared a difference of view on a particular issue, which he clearly articulated in court, articulated in court, and had the fired because he sought to give a different view on the matter, a view which did not conflict in principle with the written submissions which we at GCOM had been exposed to and had not objected to. So you see clearly where the AG sits. And GCOM, in its part, sits on this matter. So we are certainly going towards an election in which, whilst we are doing the things that are routinely and normally done, we're not addressing the issues that ought to be addressed if we are to strive to fulfill our mandate by delivering free and fair elections and giving every citizen who has the right to vote the opportunity to do so. And one other matter that also falls within that context is the question of the stamping of the ballot papers. We have had many incidents in the past over a number of elections where the ballot paper, the single ballot paper, and emphasis on paper, has to be stamped at the top and at the bottom so that when there's a division of that paper, each ballot, the ballot for general elections, has the stamp, and the ballot for regional elections has the stamp. And we have had the circumstance where from time to time there's only one stamp, and therefore one of the ballots is not considered a valid ballot because it's not stamped. And the extent to which this has been reoccurring, we have now argued that a mechanism should be put in place to ensure that both the top and the bottom, the general and the regional, are stamped. The response to that is that, well, we will do work with our officers to make sure that they do the right thing. That is work we've been doing all the time. That is work which is commendable. But that is not work that ensures that, in fact, authenticated ballots are counted. What do I mean by that? If you have one ballot paper with two ballots, it's one paper, and there is a stamp on one half of the paper, then that is sufficient evidence to say that the other half is also authentic. It's not yet divided. It's one document with the stamp. So clearly that document is authenticated. And if we discover that the second half is not stamped, then we could put that stamp on before we divide them so that we have two authentic ballots. And there's a pushback on that, contending that the law does not provide for that and that we should rely on education. And there are two issues here. If the law does not provide for that, and we realize that there is that mischief, that problem, then we can go and have the legislature address the problem. And here is where GCOM is very, very reluctant. Though we identify problems which may require legislative reaction, GCOM has been very reluctant to approach the legislature to say, here is a matter that needs to be rectified to provide us with the means of ensuring that we conduct free and fair election and an election that allows every electorate to be able to cast his vote and for the value of that vote to be no different from the value of another vote. So we are faced with serious problems as far as I'm concerned. With the proper conduct and proper delivery of free and fair election and the allowing each electorate to cast his or her vote with equal value being attributed to each of those votes.
Vincent Alexander here updating us on, excuse me, on GCOM and its preparation for election. Quite depressing. The long list of things that need to be corrected for us to talk about a free and fair election. And on this 11th hour, that list, instead of getting smaller, that list is getting bigger and bigger. Vincent, the international community was very much involved in the 2020 election, involved at the level of quote unquote observing the election. Some people argue, including myself, argue that they were complicit in installing the government. But they also made recommendations because all of them, including CARICOM, said that GCOM is broken. CARICOM, if my memory serves me correct, went as far as to say GCOM in its present state cannot deliver a free and fair election. Of course, they signed off on the 2020 election. But they made recommendations for reform of GCOM. I know the EU has been in Guyana. The question I guess I'm asking is, has the international community been engaging GCOM on these matters? It seems to me that a community that puts so much store on electoral integrity, that pronounce on the paucity of integrity at GCOM, could be silent 5 years later.
I wouldn't say that the international community is altogether silent.
Okay.
But I would say that the difficulty that we are faced with in the first instance is when the international community interfaces with GCOM, they're not interfacing with a homogeneous body of people. They're interfacing with people who have different views, and therefore there is no one position that GCOM responds with, even as they put one position to GCOM. So that's a part of the difficulty, I think, that we are faced with. And so the problem is not merely a problem of interfacing with GCOM. It's a problem of them being strident about the changes which should occur, as they were strident, rightfully or wrongfully, about the conduct of the 2020 elections. I don't see the community being similarly strident as they were in 2020, though they have, in fact, interfaced with GCOM, and those matters have been raised with them. But when those matters are raised with them, they're raised with them by a side of GCOM and not GCOM as a collective body, because there are those in GCOM who are responsible for the non-implementation of the recommendations. There are those in GCOM who are responsible for us not having a review of what occurred in 2020, which if we had, we would have been able to address the question of the deceased and the absentee voters being voted for. We've been able very early to address those questions, because a part of what is now being said is that we don't have the time to do these things. But we are the ones who refused post 2020 to sit down collectively, review, and see what actions should have been taken.
Vincent, here responding to the question of the role of the international community, which I still think would be pivotal on what happens between now and election day. Vincent, let's shift the gears a bit and let's talk about the issue of the day, and that is the disappearance and death of a young girl, 11-year-old Adriana Young. And I want to pose the question to you that I've posed to myself and to all the guests who've come here, because I think we are in the presence of groundbreaking political and social development in Guyana. 20 years from now, when our young people are going to be studying this period, this would be a pivotal moment in our history. And often when we are in the presence of these moments, we don't necessarily realize the gravity of the situation. And the other thing is that those of us who try to make sense of it are doing so while things are unfolding and don't necessarily get it right. So I put that disclaimer. But I also, like I said, I think we have a duty to try to make sense of what is happening. There's no way we can depend on the politicians, political parties to give a comprehensive understanding of what's happening. Alas, as much as I like the media, I don't think the media have been grappling with this moment and the profundity of it. We also have some opinion shapers who I think have fallen in to a set view of what Guyana is. And they're trying to take this moment and to fit it in that set view, and not necessarily grappling with the changes, the changing dynamic, and so on. And so I turn to you again to ask, why the disappearance and death of an 11-year-old girl, working class, out there in the country, has galvanized our country in such a profound and wide-ranging manner?
David, there are two perspectives, two aspects to that question. There is the incident specifically that occurred in relation to the disappearance of that girl, to her body being found subsequently in the pool which she was not in, and the whole manner in which that issue has been handled by the Guyana Police Force, and I dare say by the government. I think that's an issue that one has to look at. But that issue is symptomatic in many regards of the wider issue that confronts our society. So the specific issue, one cannot be other than concerned about the manner in which that situation was handled, given the behavior of the police, both in terms of what they did and what they did not do. There's serious questions about the police in terms of what they did, and that is, did not they prevented, for example, the parents from doing a thorough search and things like that. Those are things that they did. And what they did not do, they themselves did not do the thorough job the police should do. What they also did was to provide false information that sought to distract from what was really happening. So we have a serious problem with the operation of a police force in terms of what they did and what they did not do. And clearly shows that our police force is not fit for purpose, or probably does not fit purpose. They may well be having the capacity, but not exercising that capacity, and therefore not fitting purpose. And the government comes in to that scenario as well. And I want to make some specific references in that regard. Not much mention has been made about the Prime Minister's appearance on a talk show out of the US. I think it's called the Gideon's Talk Show. In that talk show, one of the things the Prime Minister said with tremendous clarity, he said, as I appear on this show at this time, our relevant partners are being consulted on the question of assistance to be rendered to fulfill the president's promise that no stone will be left unturned to settle this matter. That's what the Prime Minister said. The talks were undergoing with their partners, meaning the ABCE countries or some of those countries, in pursuit of the kind of assistance the kind of assistance required by the parents under the promise of the president that no stone will be left unturned. Yet we have a situation now where the Americans have reported that there were no such discussions with them. But that's not what the Prime Minister told the world. Americans have said they have no such discussion. On the other hand, we now have a single person turning up as a forensic expert, which suggests not only was there no discussions with the Americans, but that there were no discussions with others. And so we have been, here's a government that has literally sought to blindfold and to lie on us. And to have the president now say that he has done all that he said he would do, all that he said he would do, he would leave no stone unturned. But we clearly have the evidence that stones have been left unturned. And therefore, in that circumstance, one has to ask the question, why? Why would a government that has no interest in this matter other than getting to the truth, which they said is their interest, why would they leave stones unturned and try to suggest to people, in fact, that they have left no stones unturned? So here is what I consider to be a guilty verdict, not only in terms of the police and their omissions and commissions, but a guilty verdict in terms of the government and their omissions as well. So that for me, I will not draw any conclusions about cause of death. Manner of death, sorry. Manner of death. I will not draw conclusions about manner of death. But I will say that we have an obligation and a duty to make that determination. And that anyone who does not pursue that obligation and that duty is guilty in the circumstance. And therefore, we have a government which, for all intents and purposes, has to be considered to be guilty by virtue of its commissions and its omissions. Now, for me, that situation is both a representation and symbolic of the state of the nation. So this is not just an incident that has occurred. It is a pattern of governance that has persisted post 2020, where the state has been guilty of acts which makes the state complicit in wrongdoings, the killing by the police and other things. So that in many regards, what occurred after this occurrence with the girl's death, her apparent murder, was not merely a response to that occurrence. It really became a moment, a crescendo, in terms of the people's response to the manner of governance in our country. And so we have two problems. We have the problem of an electoral system that does not produce the kind of government and consequently the kind of governance that we require in Guyana. And then we have the governance which is completely at odds with what is required of a democratic government. Completely at odds. And therefore we have a completely dysfunctional system, which poses a big problem. How do people respond to a system that is dysfunctional in a manner other than to take the system on? How do people respond in a manner other than to take the system on? And what moral grounds does the system have to treat the people as if they have no right of a particular response? A response, in fact, which is within the law, because when one looks to see what occurred at Lenora, there was nothing that occurred at Lenora that required the kind of police response. There was nothing occurred in the first instance of the GPC that warranted the police response. I heard live someone saying, "Oh God, we are here. We're just simply protesting. We've done nothing wrong. And the police have come firing, shooting at us." I heard that live. This is before any so-called looting took place. A peaceful assembly of protesters were shot upon by the police. Now, how do we respond to that? How could any civil-minded person say, let this work? When protesting is the fact part of the system, and you're not letting that work, but you're saying let the system work. And at the same time, you're saying let the system work in the face of a system which is eroding all of the principles of the way in which the system should work, and interfering with the rights of the citizens with absolutely no recourse. No recourse. So the citizens are in a conundrum. They are in a society that is dysfunctional, both in terms of how it determines its leadership and in terms of what the leadership does to it and what the leadership is doing to it is completely in conflict with the norms of a civil society and a civic society. So Guyana is in a crisis. And I don't know that crises are resolved by saying, let the system work, because the system is itself the source of the crisis. So we have two problems. We have the big problem in the problem with the individual case, and we have the wider problem, which this case provided a moment for people to express their concerns about, because we're talking about what happened in Linden. We're talking about a government that is not inclusive, that refuses. Imagine the parliament was not allowed to debate this matter. Imagine that. The parliament was not allowed to debate this matter. Imagine 2 days ago, if I'm not mistaken, a small group of 7 to 12 persons turned up to protest outside of the convention center and are told that they cannot assemble outside of the convention center. And what the police seek to do is 2 blocks away to put up barriers to prevent people from being involved in peaceful protest, which is a norm in any democracy. You just have to watch the television and see what happens in America, or what happens in Australia, or what happens anywhere else in terms of protests. The people are not corralled in the first instance. They're not shot at in the second instance. In Guyana, they're corralled and they're shot at. And then the government claims it has some legitimacy to be our government with all of this dysfunctionality. We are in a crisis, and the citizenry is faced with the question of how do we resolve this crisis, because our electoral system is irrelevant, and the governance that we are exposed to after those who are elected are put in place is also dysfunctional, and therefore we're not enjoying our rights. So what right does the government have in those circumstances?
Vincent Alexander tonight here, weighing in on the Adriana Young issue, which is not going away. We learned today that the family is flying the body to the United States for another postmortem. We learned that the government is digging in its heels and doing everything. We have seen its propagandists now directing their attacks on the family, on the family. People like Freddie Kissoon and others directly attacking the family unheard of before. So Vincent's analysis, I think, is on spot. We have a crisis. We have a crisis on our hands. And I think the government knows that there's a crisis in our country, and a crisis of great proportion. My own view is that I think they are the government. Government has intelligence. This is a government that is invested in all kinds of information gathering, all kinds of policing things. This government must know what happened to that child. I am saying we are not a big, large country with a government that is not interested in what's happening in the country. I am saying this government knows. My view is, and Vincent, I want you to weigh in on this, is that they know that once the truth comes out, then all hell is likely to break loose in this country. And I think they're more interested in regime survival rather than dealing with the underlying problems that you and others have pointed to. Because in many regards, this is a crisis of their making. I mean, the opposition has been criticized for not going on the streets. Some of their supporters have been very critical of Aubrey Norton. So you cannot say that it's the opposition that has created this crisis. The opposition has been criticized for not creating a crisis by its own supporters. This is your own making. And this government cannot say to us with all the intelligence apparatus at their disposal that they don't know how that child met or demise. Vincent Alexander.
David, the determination of this matter will be a nail in the coffin of legitimacy of the government. It's as simple as that. The determination of this matter in itself, this singular matter, will be a nail in the coffin of its legitimacy. A nail which will further the moment that the occurrence has caused of the people themselves uprising in the circumstance of no other recourse, not only for this incident, but for the crescendo we now at in terms of the state of the nation.
As crisp as they come. Vincent, let me take you in another direction. This past week, we had the death of long-standing PNC member Amna Ali, a PNC stalwart going back to the early 1970s. And I think whatever you think about Amna Ali, she's important in our politics for many reasons, but one standout, and that is here was an Indian woman who was very much part and parcel in a genuine way of the leadership of an African party. One cannot look at Amna Ali and say she was window dressing for the PNC. I have seen PNC Africans shaking their boots in front of Amna Ali. I know we are accustomed to window dressing in both political parties, but I am arguing that Amna Ali was not window dressing in the PNC. She was legitimately a member of the PNC and wielded, not fake power, wielded power that come with the offices that she held in that party. So I want to say that as a preface. But I want you to give your own reflection, because you would have grown up with Amna Ali in the PNC, your own reflection on our contributions. And then I want you to zero in on an issue that people have been murmuring about, and that is the absence of Aubrey Norton from the funeral and the wake for Amna. In fact, as we were coming on to this program, I forgot that I had my television on, and you managed to hear Vice President Jack Dio denouncing Aubrey Norton for not attending the funeral of Amna Ali. So one, your own reflection on Amna and our contribution to the PNC, and of course, by extension, the country. But I'm more interested in our contribution to the PNC for obvious reasons. And then the Aubrey Norton non-attendance at the funeral and the wake for Amna. Over to you, as Wayne Caesar would say.
Let me start off by saying that, Amna Ali is someone I know as much or more than many of those who proclaim to know her. And the reason why I say so is because my association with Amna Ali goes back, close association, goes back to the mid-70s. When I became the chairman of the YSM, I have vivid memories of on weekends going up to the Edward, to Amna's home, and doing political work in West Berbice, particularly in the Rusignol, the Edward area, towards the formation and the maintenance of the YSM in that area. I go that far back in terms of my association with Amnali. Sunday afternoons, Saturday afternoons, I leave Georgetown, I go to the Edward, I pick her up, there are other comrades with her, and we walk those villages in pursuit of establishing and maintaining the presence of the YSM in that area. My relationship with Amna Ali continued, I would say, until the Congress where Aubrey Norton was duly democratically elected. For whatever reason, after those elections, Amna's disposition towards me changed, and he was the person responsible for the conduct of those elections. Amna Ali was integral to the party, its growth, its development, and its successes. There's no doubt about that. Integral. She had a very strong personality. She did a lot of work in terms of the work of the party, in terms of the party's outreach to people and all of that. And one cannot take that away from Amna Ali. But you know, I had reason to part company with the party in 2007 for what I consider to be the party not embracing the correct political culture. And I must confess that if I'm to say anything negative about Amnali, is that she was integral to the reason why, not she as a person, but her politics was integral to the politics I sought to distance myself from. And so that is what I would say about Amna Ali. She has gotten a lot of accolades for the work she has done. And I have noticed in all of those accolades, there's always that little comment about, no matter she might have cursed me out and things like that. In the main, she's a significant contributor to the party, but unfortunately also embraced that element which I think is critical to making the party different and making the politics in Guyana different. I was impressed that in the circumstance of her death, after she had resigned from the party, and in resigning had said that she would prefer to see the PDP government than a government under Narkin. I was impressed that the party came out and made a glowing tribute to Amna Ali. I think the party exhibited a certain level of maturity in that regard, a glowing tribute, a tribute as good as or better than any other tribute that may have been made in relation to Amna Ali's death, and the party should be recognized for that. And that has to be ultimately attributed to the leader of the party. Has to be ultimately attributed to the leader of the party. He may not have been expressing his own views, but certainly he sought to express what I think was the mass view of the party, minus saying anything ill of the dead. Minus saying anything ill of the dead. And that is what one expects in a moment like this. That's what one expects. Jagdeo. Jagdeo has absolutely no moral authority to speak on these matters. And Jagdeo speaking in this matter is just another instance of political wickedness. That is what it is, nothing less than that. Here is a man who is on record of maltreating ill-treating, trampling on a woman whom he professed to have married, treat her like dirt. And this is public knowledge. Treat her like dirt and became the president of this country after doing that. And has the gall to pronounce on who is worthy to be leader of what. Jagdeo has no moral leg to stand on in this country. And all the people who do not criticize him for it, who do not hold him over the coals for it, are complicit in the treatment meted out to Vashni. And they know what the treatment was. They know, they're all complicit. And so Jagdeo has absolutely no moral legs upon which to stand in talking about anybody's leadership, including the leadership of Norton, as he is sought to do, using the moment of someone's death to get involved in his normal, wicked politics. Having said that, I have known Aubrey Norton as long as I have known Anna Ali. I've known Aubrey Norton as long as I've known Anna Ali. And we have had various discussions on various matters in which we may have differences. Matters in which we may have differences. And one of the matters in which we have differences is very, very current. This whole question of the middle class. The whole question of the middle class. And he is presently suffering as a consequence of classism, I dare say. But one thing Aubrey Norton always said in his criticism of the middle class is that a quality of the middle class is an attribute, better to use the word an attribute of the middle class, is hypocrisy. He's always maintained that one of the problems he has, why he distanced himself in some regard from conforming to middle class behavior, is that a lot of middle class behavior is hypocritical. Is that they do things that are not acceptable, but they clothe them in a manner to make them acceptable. And that he, Aubrey Norton, was not prepared to embrace that attribute of hypocrisy which he identifies with the middle class. In that circumstance, I could well understand his non-attendance at the funeral. It is not an act of ill will. It is simply an act demonstrative of his disposition to the middle class and their hypocrisy, and not himself seeking to be hypocritical in his conduct of himself. So I can contextualize his absence in that regard. As party leader, his party has done what is correct. He has a disposition to hypocrisy. And given the relationship that Amna Ali spoke about between herself and Norton that she will not see as president and would prefer the PDP to be the president, then it would be highly hypocritical of him to go demonstrating all those demonstrations that you got from people like Malik Chan and all of those, which are elements of hypocrisy that Norton speaks about. So, one has to respect him for embracing a particular disposition and principle and living that disposition and principle. And in fact, that may well be a strength It may well be a strength rather than a weakness. So I don't have to deal with the question of Norton's non-attendance in the context of Jagdeo. Jagdeo has absolutely no right to comment on this matter. Absolutely no right, right? But I have sought to contextualize Norton's absence. It may not be the reason, but I am contextualizing it from my understanding of the Norton I know and my understanding of the relationship between Norton and Abner Ali, a relationship which she spoke to in public. And therefore, there could be no doubt about the chasm that existed between the two of them and the hypocrisy that would have been evident if he had gone saying glowing things as if everything was hunky dory.
As frank as you can get, and I have been hesitant, Vincent, to engage you on these matters publicly, and I'm so glad that tonight we've broken the ice. I know your relationship with the party at a formal level ended in 2007. As you've repeatedly said, you've not renewed your party membership, so you are technically not a party member. But anyone who knows you and knows Guyana politics will know that you are a PNC man, a party man. And I think it points to the complexity of our politics. I have on this program, and even here tonight, you see some very negative comments about Aubrey Norton. Some of them I'm sure comes from a place of sincerity and objective analysis. But I have sought to raise the question of class here. I made the point, Vincent, that in hindsight, Burnham and Barrow and Manley and Williams and so on, they created a new Afro-West Indian middle class that is not grounded in status, but more in education and education mobility. And so in many regards, what we have in Guyana now are two middle classes, certainly on the African side and also on the Indian side, because I think Jagdeo and them have created a new middle class based on awarding of money and contract, what the PNC call friends, family, and favorites. That in a sense, in the African side, we have two African middle classes. There's no way people like yourself and Aubrey Norton and myself can deny that we are middle class by virtue of education, but certainly we are in no way part of that traditional middle class. And I think in many regards, it's playing itself out, those two classes or those two subclasses in the last year or so. The dynamics have been playing themselves out, and I think it's a good thing for Guyana. But if you personalize it, as some people tend to do, well, Norton is this and Norton is that, or Nigel Hughes is this and Nigel is that, I think we are failing to understand a dynamic that is playing itself out before our very eyes, the class dynamic, both on the Indo-Guyanese side, but especially on the African Guyanese side, where we have these two subclasses, perhaps competing for the apex of political power. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I don't wish to say for it. I agree with you that the class dynamics are not only interclass, but we do have the intraclass dynamics, and that it's that intraclass dynamic which is playing out, I would contend, in relation to how Aubrey Norton is seen by some, and it's playing out in terms of how he sees some.
Yeah. Vincent Alexander here tonight. Vincent, thank you so much for coming through. And I think tonight's interview was somewhat different because we got to hear some other aspects of your mind on some of these matters, which, like I said, I have been very cautious about engaging you on some of these matters, because I know how delicate they are and how misrepresented your comments could be reported on this matter. But thank you very much for shedding your light. Is there anything you would like to say as we close out?
I must say that I am myself conscious of the kind of misrepresentation that could take place, but decided tonight to err on the side of not being hypocritical.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you may recall that some years ago I had made some statements and was taken on for those statements in relation to issues of Potters and so. And
Yeah.
even those who, when I made those statements, for example, one Freddie Kissoon said to me that I was really an exponent of dialectics in being able to make those statements. He told me that personally and then criticized me publicly. And when I made those statements, your women folk and I and those women were also critical of me when I made those statements. But I wouldn't necessarily repeat those statements. But I think that there was much in those statements that reflected our reality.
Reality. Vincent, thank you very much, my brother.
You're welcome.
Vincent Alexander. I like this interview here tonight. And I hope that this is a beginning, because I think Guyana is very, very interesting country. We are Caribbean, we are so-called third world, and so we share the characteristics like other countries. So in that sense, we are not unique. But there is a uniqueness, nevertheless, about Guyana. I think the kind of intellectual discourse that comes out of our country matches that and surpasses that of most countries in the world. But I also think that there is a dumbing down of that intellectual capacity that makes Guyana such a difficult place. As I said, I respect people's right to be critical of all political leaders. I have been. I wouldn't take away that right from anyone. But I think sometimes we have to try to grasp the context of what we are faced with. We have to be able to distinguish between the forest and the tree, so forth, if much we know that there's a relationship between the forest and the tree. Right? And I think that there is a simplistic response to the Norton phenomenon. I know we know better. I know we know better. I know we know better. The Norton phenomenon is a very complex phenomenon. Guyana's been, I remind people, when Burnham came back to Guyana in the late 40s, he experienced the Norton phenomenon. Some of the Burnhamites say were criticizing Norton. Either don't know that or don't forget it. He was dark-skinned. He was from the lower middle class. He was a country boy, because at that time Kitty was country. And he was treated shabbily by the red-skinned middle class. Some of them found him unelectable, as you're all saying about Norton. Burnham faced the same class phenomenon. My own mentor and leader, A.U.C. Kwayana, was once called a country boor because he refused to move to Georgetown when he became a minister in 1953. Because he picked up women carrying their load to town in the government car from Buxton to Georgetown. They call him a country boor. That class thing that Norton is facing, and by extension, the rest of us, and that some of you are not engaging. It's one thing to say, I don't like Norton as the presidential candidate. I can live with that. But it's another thing to repeat the class bigotry as the reason why you don't like him as the presidential candidate. And I think 90% of the people who are doing it don't realize that they're repeating class bigotry. But I want to throw in tonight what you all are saying about Norton. They said about Burnham, who is now your God. He faced the same thing. He was put out of a certain section of the Guyana, the Georgetown Cricket Club. He was premier, but he wasn't a member of a Portuguese institution. And of course, typical Burnham, he went into rails with the masses, and the rest is history. I'm saying to you all, this thing is much more complex. This thing is much more complex. The class dynamics. Whenever I get depressed on this issue, I go back to a small book written by C.L.R. James, a name that I have called many times on this program, called Party Politics in the West Indies, in which he analyzes the Black Caribbean middle class. I don't know if it's still in print, but if you all ever get a chance, those of you who are inclined in that direction, the analysis of the Black, I am not, because I grew up in party politics, in a party that had its fair share of the Black middle class. They were the intelligentsia, and so not necessarily that old middle class was based on status, but both based on academic prowess and so on. And I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. So I'm not knocking the middle class. Y'all don't get me wrong. I'm not knocking the middle class. I would not trade that experience with that middle class that I grew up with in the Working People's Alliance for anything. But I'm acutely aware of the sociology of our country and our region, and how social class plays into that. You know, I remember Michael Manley coming on the scene and saying better must come, and liberating Rastafarians from the clutches of class bigotry. But Manley himself later on, when confronted with his middle class spirit, said, well, one would imagine that if you are an employer and you're accustomed to clean and neat staff, and someone comes in and one is sitting there with dreadlocks, and the very Rastafarians that he liberated in a political way, when he came face to face with his own social instincts, he threw the Rastas under the bus. In effect, said that they were unkept. And is that dialectic? Vincent used that term earlier. We have to understand. As I said, Aubrey Norton and Vincent Alexander, myself, and so many of you on this program, we are middle class. We got to that middle class through education. But we were a new middle class. Different origins. We are much closer in social habits to the working class. Right? We are much closer in social habits to the working class. I mean, Creoles come out of we mouth easy. That old middle class Creoles don't come out of their mouth easy. And it's more in terms of distance. And I'm making these comments here tonight because, as I'm saying, Guyana is changing in front of our faces. And sometimes we are not aware that we are part of this big change. And so we don't necessarily search for fresh ways, I don't want to say new ways, fresh ways of analyzing our being. I mean, Jack Dew and them sought to socialize the African scrapers, as they call them today, socialize them as mercenaries. When they talk about crossover forces, those boys they're talking about. Because they felt that if they control them, they control the street force. And so they developed the street force, which has now come back to bite them. Because they didn't have an understanding of African Guyanese and African Guyanese history and African Guyanese culture. So they took the African Guyanese scrapers, as they call them today, for granted. They thought that these were robots that you can just use like that and so on. But it's their baby that has come back to bite them. And it is because they didn't understand. They thought because if you listen to the analysis made by the Indian elites about Africans, we come out of slavery, we plant cassava and edo rather than plant rice, be not into business with this. They've created an African Guyanese personality in the image that they want, which is not necessarily, in fact, not necessarily, which is not the real African Guyanese personality. And that human beings are product and shapers of their social reality. And so when these boys now are biting them, they want to blame people like me and the political leaders and say, we are the ones who socialize these boys. We didn't socialize them. Those boys were walking around with bullets with our names on them. Because those are the boys that they socialized to kill us, and they did kill Waddle and Crummy Wing and 400 youth. The Phantom Squad is the PPP's invention. And that Phantom Squad has now come full circle. Because that Phantom Squad, or that culture that they sought to create in the African Guyanese community, is an alien culture in many regards. And, it plays itself out. There's a limit, There's a limit to this concocted thing. And so I'm saying that to say that I'm not asking us to be intellectuals, but I'm asking us to understand the breadth and the complexity of our society. We are small nations in terms of numbers, but the Caribbean is perhaps the most complex region in the world. It is the meeting place of several cultures, sometimes conflictual cultures. We were the center of European modernity. We are the center of the evolution of modern capitalism. That is why Eric Williams wrote Capitalism and Slavery. Small nation, but very complex. You all are first world people dressed in third world clothes. But sometimes we confine ourselves to the third worldism and not recognizing that our society beckons us to move beyond that. We are perhaps the most complex region in the world. I don't want to be elitist. But in a small place like Guyana, 750,000 people, look at one generation. Burnham, Jagan, Quayana, Martin Carter. And go on and on. Those are just a few of the intellectual and political giants in a small society. Small societies don't create that kind of that quality. You take a place like St. Lucia, Arthur Lewis, Derek Walcott, Nobel Prize. I'm not trying to be elitist. What I'm saying, at Trinidad that produces at Eric Williams and C.L.R. James and George Padmore, little small societies. We are much more advanced culturally, intellectually than we give ourselves credit for. And part of my objective in this program is to unlock that for us, help us to unlock our own capacity. There are many things I am unhappy with the PPP for. But one of the things that I'm most unhappy is the way in which they have de-intellectualized our country. You encourage young people to sing slackness. You laugh when they come on your platform and they put on, look how this rapper, look how this Kaisonian come and comes to the PPP. You encourage them with a stink and dirty. And then they start to sing stink and dirty about your religion. And you don't want to jail them. You have de-intellectualized the society. And it's not coming back to bite you. Those lyrics that Baby Skello and a lot of the other rappers, it's a function of the market. The market. That is what sells. Not just sell in terms of the economic market, but the political market. A lot of those little boys and girls make their payday when elections come around and the parties have rallies. Baby Skello sings that because there's a demand for it politically, economically. It's the market. But no, your religious compadres say he's singing against the religion and you want to jail him. Contradictions of our society. We're not going to stop, sisters and brothers. We are not going to stop to try to make our country a better place. The burden is on us. Some of us are in party politics. But we have learned that party politics has its limits. Good night. I'll see you all tomorrow night. I hope to assemble a big cast like Kwesi Ojinga. Kwesi used to get 30 people on the stage. He said, Kwesi, there's plenty people for police, but I mean like big cast. We're going to try to assemble a big cast there tomorrow night to round off the week.